Alright, so you remember me talking about corpora in my presentation, but you're not really quite sure where I went or what I did. And so let's talk about some things. First of all, I talked about two different corpora, or sets of corpus resources. I talked about the Corpus of Contemporary American English, and I talked about Lex Tutor. Now, COCA, or the Corpus of Contemporary American English, let's look at that first. If you type in, let's see, Corpus of American English, what'll happen is you'll come to a website, right, like this, and it looks like this. It's the Corpus of Contemporary American English. It's got more than 400 million words in it. And when you enter, it looks like this. Now it's going to ask you for a name and password after you use it a couple of times. And so I'll go ahead and put in my name and password, and that way we can interact with it. And so what you have is if you want to search for a word, like for example today I used the word depend, and so if you search the word depend, and what words go with the word depend? Well, naturally, if you're a native English speaker, you would think, well, depend goes with on. And there are 8,595 instances of the word depend used, but I can also begin to do other things. For example, I can say, hey, what word comes next to depend right after it? In other words, every time you see the word depend, what's the first word to the right of it? And I can research based on that. And now when I do my search, you'll notice that it gives me all the words that come next to the word depend. For example, 6,250 times the word next to depend is on, followed by upon, which essentially means the same thing as on. And then you have words like heavily and largely and solely, but most of us as native English speakers know that we would rely heavily on or rely heavily upon, depend on. And so, as native English speakers, we use language, we use vocabulary, and vocabulary has become a big deal. Um, and this is a tool that you could use to help your students. It's also a tool that you could use to actually go and identify samples. And you can choose where to get the samples. For example, you can take samples from spoken language, samples from fictional language, or magazines, newspapers, or even samples from academics. You can even compare words to see which words are more frequently used in academics, and there's a whole list of things you can do with this particular site. The other site we talked about was Lex Tutor. Now, Lex Tutor is an interesting site because, of course, it gives you different tests you can do to see what level of vocabulary you are at or your students are at. And if you have developmental students, that might be interesting to see what their level of vocabulary is. It also will give you the lists. For example, there are very specific lists in English. First thousand, second thousand, and the academic word list. I didn't talk about the university word list, but it's related to the academic word list. It's just a different set of research. But this particular tool will allow students to study that vocabulary. Today, what I did talk about was a vocab profiler. And you'll remember, if you go into vocab profile and you click on English, anything you cut and paste in here, if you're out reading an article and you want to use that for your students, you can cut and paste it in here, submit it, and it'll break it out into word groups. It'll break it out into the first thousand, the second thousand, and the academic word list. Again, you'll notice that the first thousand words takes up about 70% of what's, 70 to 72% of what's happening in language. The second thousand words accounts for about another 8%, and so that's where you get your first 80%. When you add the academic word list, that puts you up somewhere around 90 to 91%. But if you're developing materials for students, this is an easy way to go down and say, well, which words do I think students are going to need to know? Immediately looking at this, academic errors, files, they're going to know what those are. Input, they may not be sure of. Method, they may not be sure of, but I know that server I would have to give information for, or vocab profile I would have to give information for, because the average person is not aware of those words. And so when I develop teaching materials, I can gloss those so that students know what's going on. Now, how did I gloss them? Well, you may remember I showed you another trick. If you go to Easy to Find, you can take a list of words, paste it in, and generate the definitions. You've got your gloss done for you. The world's getting easy, and it's free. I hope that helps.